Brazil Tower Company. We are a pure build-to-suit company, so we're not purchasing existing assets. As of end of August, we hit the 700 towers milestone in Brazil, and as early as an hour ago, we started a new contract in Colombia. So the company is going to expand in 4 new markets: Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Guatemala. Again, under the same business model of build-to-suit. And I always like to say that we're in the business of getting out of this business, meaning that our business plan from day one has been and is still to build and to sell. And in the next couple of months, we're going to announce the sale of 400 towers to one of the major aggregator in Brazil. So, very basic business model, great return, and again, we're here to exit.
Great. So
That's a good point. Well, goodbye then.
So before we venture south of the border, I want to kind of go north to south and start with Mexico, but maybe take a quick pit stop in the U.S. and ask Dagan a little bit about the T-Mobile transaction. They sold almost all of their assets to Crown, but they kept 600 plus. You ended up buying them, and tell us a little bit about those assets and why they were for sale and why they weren't sold earlier.
Sure, no, absolutely. I think, again, to the major business plan and the tenets of the business plan were to do the best transactions we could across a much larger geography than some of the other acquirers were looking at. And I think in the United States, by and large, we didn't see a ton of attractive assets to acquire. A couple of the larger deals in the U.S. we were active in, but they didn't really feel like the right fit for us. We did some smaller acquisitions in the U.S., and we really kept the focus on Latin America. What we saw in the T-Mobile transaction was an opportunity to do a larger deal, to get a substantial platform with a great credit in T-Mobile, predominantly in municipalities and urban and suburban locations in the Northeast and California, which we felt like were great growth markets for the next 5 years and where we would see really strong lease up. The underpinnings are, of course, T-Mobile, as well as really the big 4 carriers that are on those towers today. And because of the fact that these are municipal builds, some of them have sophisticated landlords. Sometimes in some of the sites, the ground rent was greater than the rent that T-Mobile was paying. I think it kind of scared away a couple of the publics from bidding as aggressively as they might do. And we really saw an opportunity to swoop in, act quickly with Blackstone behind us, and get a great deal done in the middle of the summer when a lot of people were taking vacation. And T-Mobile was looking for a buyer that would step up and get the contract done quickly. And it wasn't really about top price for them. It was more about somebody that they could work with going forward. That's a perfect opportunity for Phoenix. That's exactly what we want to be doing. And so the timing was right, the opportunity was right, and we think we'll do great things with the assets. In terms of why they weren't sold to Crown Castle, it's a mix. Some of these towers were built by T-Mobile after the Crown Castle transaction. Some of them are Metro PCS sites that they got through the merger with Metro PCS that they didn't need anymore. And some of them were sites that candidly could not be sold a few years ago because they were working with the landlords on renegotiating ground leases, et cetera, which they've since been able to do. So again, we think it's a really unique opportunity to get some scale in the U.S. and further our platform across the Americas, and the timing couldn't be better.
And then for both you and Maria, I guess the question would be, since you're in so many markets, how do you think about regional synergies on the operations side? So is it single country GMs that are running each business individually, or do you have a single lease administration function, a single NOC? How do you kind of look at the business?
Sure, I'll answer that first, Maria. I think in the U.S., for instance, we have regional people located in the West Coast and the East Coast that really manage the assets well. These are people that we've done significant business with. A lot of them are folks that worked at Global Tower Partners with me over the last decade or so. So they're people that know towers, know how to get business done. In Latin America, we have a mix of seasoned professionals that oversee BTS that are located in each of the markets. In some of the markets, we have general managers if they're big enough. In some of them, we kind of scale the general manager function. For instance, in Costa Rica and Panama, we have one general manager However, in the Dominican Republic, we also have one general manager, and we're really looking for good people in each of the markets we're in so that the carriers don't have to call Boca every time something goes wrong. We feel like that's really important, and that's helped us scale, because you can't scale unless you have good people in each of the markets. And we have a great back office in Boca, too, that supports them. And again, there are a lot of people that have worked in the tower space for a long time. There are a lot of people that have done tower transactions for a long time. And it really is all about the people when it comes down to it. And we have great people and a team that I'm really proud of. So that's helped us tremendously.
Thanks, Dagan. The founder of Torrecom Message Center Management, or more commonly known as MCM, has been in the tower business for 25 years before it was actually a business. So here in the U.S., we have a crew that has been in the business, was part of developing the business, part of early regulation, later regulation, long before there was a PCIA, a SOMA, or a NATE. So the U.S. Is fairly well established. In Central America, we have a country manager that handles Nicaragua and Guatemala, which works very well. Unlike Mexico, which is a little bit more standalone because of the size, and complicated now, throw AT&T in there, it's even more interesting. The one thing we have been able to do is we've done central location for things such as engineering is coming out of our Nicaraguan team. We were able to find a really good group in a large number of engineers for the structural analysis and the pre-design, and they're housed in Nicaragua. But every other function within the organization or within the countries are basically standalone.
Great. So maybe to give Jose something to talk about, and Shahram as well, I guess another common overarching theme would be just foreign currency fluctuations, and give us a level set in terms of your contracts and what portion of your business is denominated, if any, in U.S. dollars versus Mexican pesos, reais, and how are the FX trends affecting things for you?
100% of the revenue stream is denominated in pesos, so we don't have an issue with the devaluation of the local currency. Obviously, from an investor point of view, it's an issue at the exit. The way we try to minimize that risk is by raising debt at peso denominated. We have done so in Mexico. We were the first one, raising a loan facility in peso for $100 million 6 months ago. So that's the only way you can probably minimize the risk. The other thing is, as you have all the revenues in pesos, and most of your OPEX is also denominated in pesos, you have a natural hedge there. And most of the CapEx is also denominated in pesos, except for the steel of the tower, which is usually paid in dollars. But the steel is, the cost of the steel is more influenced by the commodity price of the steel rather than the US dollar devaluation.
As a follow-on to that, Jonathan, we have kind of a mixed breed. In Guatemala and Nicaragua, we operate solely in U.S., and in Mexico also in peso entirely. Although there are certain carriers in certain markets that all of us know on this panel that are actually trying to change U.S. dynamic in some of those Guatemala and Nicaragua markets, but it's worked very well. And I have to say, unlike Mexico, because we also have debt coming out of Mexico in the peso, unlike Mexico, Guatemala, and Nicaragua really from a debt perspective like the U.S. dollar as well.
In the case of BTC Brazil Tower,
you can pull it closer.
In the case of BTC Brazil Tower, all our contracts are in Brazilian reais. And since 6 months ago, we started raising mainly debt, and all the debt, around 170 million reais, have been raised in Brazil. So we don't have really any exposure in that regards. Now, the initial investors who invested 4 years ago when the Rias was against the dollar was around 1.6, obviously they're going to feel the pain when we're going to exit. But the capital raise for us as a build-to-suit company was very minimum compared to my colleagues here who are deploying much larger capital to purchase existing assets. So I would say for the next until end of 2016 we'll fund it. So I don't foresee any issue in terms of any issue related to the currency risk. But again, for the initial investors, that will become an issue for sure.
Yeah, and I think for Phoenix Tower International, outside of Brazil, 99% of our revenue is US dollar based. So we're very well protected outside of Brazil, which has allowed us to make a larger bet in Brazil. And in terms of the investment we have made in Brazil, it's in a separate fund from the other PTI assets, so it's allowed us to be flexible. And I think unlike Sharam, who's always looking to exit, actually Blackstone and PTI and Phoenix Tower do Brazil would actually like to hold these assets for some time because we do think that the REI will improve over time, and we want to be flexible with how we exit and make sure that we can take advantage of the market conditions as opposed to having a predetermined exit that will potentially allow us to be in a disposition with the real versus the dollar. We do think it will improve, and certainly outside of Brazil, we spend a lot of time in investment committee talking about focusing on US dollar-based economics with the carriers, and we would rather pay a little bit more in a build-to-suit contract and get USD-based revenue because we think it really helps us control our own destiny and takes one variable out of the picture in terms of growth in Latin America.
One other interesting point to add to this, and we were just talking about this a few moments ago before we started. Torrecom started in 2010. I mean, it was just a short 5 years ago. And debt and even equity could be a little challenging in the markets that we're in just a short 5 years ago. Debt was definitely out of the question unless you were getting small amounts in a Guatemala bank or a Nicaragua bank. The tides have completely changed. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The money door has opened both on equity and debt in big gangbusters, both from the U.S. side and from the market side, substantially, I think. Sure. Yeah. You're almost turning it away. So it's pretty exciting.
So let's go ahead, Sean. You can answer the same question twice now. Okay.
Beginning of 2014, we were begging for money, and today we have to. And we were discussing this right before this panel. We barely even respond to investors who are interested to put in money today in Brazil. So things have changed. Obviously, it's a business that is, you have real assets that you can put as collateral, and raising debt today in Brazil for that particular business of tower business is something that is that the bankers are very familiar with. 2-3 years ago, no bankers in Brazil could even understand the type of business we were in. So for them to write a loan for a tower company was something brand new. Yeah. So things have completely changed.
And fortunately for us, very competitive price-wise too.
So let's start at the far end and drill down a little bit on Mexico and maybe some of the carrier dynamics that you see. There's been obviously a lot of change in the mobile operator landscape, and talk about Telcel and Movistar, and I used to sell in Nextel, and what are some of their priorities? How do you see their commercial behavior changing? And then from a network standpoint, what are some of their priorities?
Yeah, well, in Mexico, fortunately, in the last 16 months, we had two very great news. The first one was the telecom reform, which allowed the playing field mainly for Telefonica, and at that time, Usal and Nextel was much needed. because of the dominant presence of Telcel. So that was the first good news. The second good news was the entrance of AT&T in Mexico. Everybody is still expecting, the results of those two good news. No, we haven't seen yet, the new assignments. We haven't seen the new deployment plan from AT&T. Everybody is expecting, but it should be a good couple of years ahead, thinking that in order for AT&T to catch up with Telefonica and try to compete with Telcel, they will need to be extremely aggressive. So far, we haven't seen any change. On the contrary, and recently there was a report on the number portability in Mexico for the first half of the year. And the funny thing is that according to that report, Telcel had a net gain of 1.5 million. And Telefonica and Usacell, both of them had a net loss of approximately 800,000 subscribers. That's after the reform. No? So basically what the market needs is, for AT&T and Telefonica to start, updating the network so that they can start competing with Telcel. Otherwise, there will be no shift in the commercial behavior of users in Mexico.
Maria, do you have a kind of a similar view, or are you seeing any different trends?
No, we all, and some of us are sitting in the audience, get together and have lunch and call each other and say, okay, did you get anything? Nah. We're all waiting. We're all peaked and ready. I think a lot of companies did come into the country thinking that it was going to happen very quickly. Not so much. I also think that it is AT&T. We've built for AT&T here in the U.S., and management for AT&T is really coming out of Nextel and Usacell kind of combined. Let's hope it's not a Sprint Nextel situation again, but we're hopeful at the moment. But it's not there yet, but the feeling we get is that in actuality the people that were there in Mexico will continue to be part of their build plan because of, we've been there, we know what the history is, it's building differently there. There's a lot of, something different over the past month. AT&T has finally started advertising. They've started to get their name on a marketing approach. Originally, the thought was going to be using just the Usacell name, and what they've actually done is Nextel and Usacell, now AT&T, all one family. So the marketing is out there. The plans seem to be, everybody's reducing the plans. They're all fighting for the consumer, of which there are many in the market. So it's yet to be seen, other than converging and marrying and sistering up and developing these two networks that are very different in a big country to try to get 4,000 or 5,000 sites rationalized before they really start going in earnest to the new build. We are still under a BTS. We're still building for Nextel legacy sites that they still need in their pipeline, so we still have activity going on in the country. The Telcel situation, it's rather confusing due to the churn that Jose had mentioned. The regulator got very concerned about the fact that telesites, wait a minute, what did we try to do? We tried to create an open market, and actually the opposite is having the effect. So the telesites situation got postponed again another 2 months. We should probably hit upon the telesite competitive environment.
We'll get to that. Yeah.
Okay. Other than that, it's really status quo, and we're all standing by, although I do think there's going to be a lot of carrier team members in the street very soon.
So is Telcel, where are they on 4G? Are they only going on their own sites? Are they customers of yours? And then Telefonica, it would be interesting, I think, to get a perspective on what they've been doing this year and last year from a network standpoint.
Well, Telefonica, and Jose knows this better than I do, coming from Telefonica Madrid, there's always been a love-hate relationship from Telefonica corporate regarding Mexico, but they've been there for a long time, and they have a lot of money invested in Mexico, and they they are still struggling with how to compete. Essentially, they've become the smaller carrier when they were at one time the second largest. They are struggling with their network demands. They have a lot of sites that they need to get built. They have very strict budget requirements right now, so it's rather challenging for them to see through investment. It's slow and it's a grind. They want the business, but they're still struggling from a marketing side, how they are going to endear the Mexican consumer to stay at a decent rate.
Yeah, well, in terms of deployment, what we have seen, you have to consider that in Mexico, there were a year ago still users were under 2G technology. So what we are seeing is AT&T integrating both network right now. When they haven't released the new deployment plan, they have already made some part of the integration program. They are upgrading all the USSL sites to 3G, and in parallel, they are also deploying 4G. Probably they have around only 20 to 30% of the network in 4G. In the case of Telefonica, they have been very much focused on overlaying the 4G technology. Right now, around 50% of the network is 4G. And in the case of Telcel, they are kind of a disciplined investor in the sense that they usually have a budget per year. They haven't changed. They didn't have the need to change because they didn't have a serious competitor. So they are very good actually at planning ahead. They have been very, very much consistent. Is the only carrier where actually they are putting money on new coverage, not only capacity. But apart from Telcel, the other two are more worried about upgrading the network and infill and increasing the capacity.
And then telesites, we can maybe talk a little bit about what you're seeing, if anything, from them.
I think the telesites is an amazing story. Prior to joining GTP and now MTP, I used to work for Telefonica on the M&A side. I was in charge actually of the selling of the towers of Telefonica in Latin America. And when 7 years ago, my bosses at Telefonica asked me to make an analysis of what should we do with the towers at Telefonica. My first proposal was to actually to spin off the towers and create a tower company. At that time, Telefonica had another priorities. They were looking for cash and to leverage the company. But is for our tower perspective, I think it's a kind of nightmare. To consider that you are competing with one company that at the same time is your client. So it's kind of, you have this blur line where things doesn't really make sense. Unfortunately, Mexico is a country with only 3 clients, so we have to take care of the few clients that we have. And having one that has this really tight relationship with our major competitor makes things kind of weird. No? Let's put it this way.
From a competitive side, Jonathan, again, when we entered into the market, and as we've done here, our business plan always assumes every tower that's standing is a competitive tower and we shouldn't build next to it. In these particular markets, because carriers still hold on to a fair share, the tower side is still new, having to, in a BTS program, be forced into building a tower next to a competing structure is still hard for all of us to stomach. It's just not something we like to do. So from our perspective, while Telesites, yes, is a new competitor in the Mexican market, I would just assume see Telefonica or AT&T go on those towers instead of forcing me under a large, 500-600 BTS program to have to build next to those facilities. The market demands are still the same. The carriers chase each other. They're chasing the same consumer. So where those guys aren't and Telcel is, they're going to want to be there. So, and Mexico needs a lot of structures, not anything that any of us in this room can even imagine how much or how deficient that market is in infrastructure for wireless right now. but they're making it very difficult, I think, for the other guys. And the regulator made it that they had to open up their pocketbook, so to speak, and give the information out and everything else, but they're still not leasing up space. And quite honestly, I'm pleased if it happens, because again, our business plan does not like having a tower. You're in a 3 or 4 carrier market, and now you've created a competitive market in 4 or 5 years from now when Telesites decides to sell, because I think they will come out of the market at some point, where you've got 2 competing towers next to each other. We've destroyed our own value by building next to them. So I see it as a positive move if it happens.
So before we move on to Brazil, maybe just a quick word on 700 megahertz and public safety and kind of where that stands. It seems to be moving faster than in the U.S., but it's all relative.
Yeah, it's a project that is very challenging. First of all, because they are not, a track record of anything like that in the world. So basically, what they are trying to do, and the government approve, and actually is included in the constitutional law, is that all the around 90 megahertz on the 700 megahertz frequency is to be given to a consortium. Usually what happens, and in all countries, and mainly in Latin America, is that the government usually freed up that spectrum for the existing carriers to actually to bid on them, so that, and they put certain requirements in terms of coverage and capacity. In the case of Mexico, they have taken a completely different view. They are giving it to a consortium. So it will be kind of very political issue the way they manage. Currently, there are 4 main items that are being considered by the different consortium by the government. The first one is, should it be for free or not, this license? The second one is, should this wholesale company be allowed to lease the spectrum or just sell the minutes? That's the second question. The third is the use of government properties, like any building or right of use on the railways or on the electrical pole. And the fourth is about basically the timing, no? It is very difficult to interact with the Mexican government, and it will require a lot of back and forth. So it's difficult. On top of that, then for the consortium need to be led by a strategic group, and we haven't seen any interest from any big corporation like Vodafone or Verizon or Sprint actually to lead any of these consortiums. So I think it's going to be a very challenging project. It's good in paper, but I think it's going to take longer than anticipated by the government.
On the other side of that equation as well, it's very expensive. It's about $10 billion, I think, the first number that came out, and the government is not well seasoned to be able to manage a network, never mind be a part of building it. But what is also interesting about that is that the local carrier is so incensed about the fact that the government is holding on to the best spectrum that may be available in the entire country, and they've paid for the spectrum that they're operating off of, and quite honestly, they're not doing anything to jump into the program whatsoever, because they just assume, buy the spectrum through an auction process, of which the government would do very well with, and, segregate off a piece to the government if they want to try to resell to MVNOs. But there's not a lot of buy-in. The equipment manufacturers that are involved, the Ericssons, the Huaweis, the Nokias, they've talked about it, but there's just not a lot of activity going on. Challenging.
Okay, so maybe Brazil, we talked a little bit about access to capital, and I'm interested in just the build-to-suit environment, both the assets that you built and the assets that you bought but were built by a developer. What are some of the drivers? What are the kind of the different approaches you took? Is it a regional approach? Is it national? Were you hinged to one carrier? Talk a little bit about how you think about that opportunity.
Yeah, sure. I think one of the interesting things about the T4U acquisition was that they did have fantastic sites that were built in and around Sao Paulo, Rio. So really great locations and sites that candidly have been up, 10 years plus and had really been kind of first movers in Brazil. But what we really found attractive about merging our existing operations with them is at Phoenix Tower we had 250 build-to-suit in our pipeline, and that was built-to-suit that we were awarded directly, predominantly from Telefonica, as well as from Sky, which is DirecTV now, of course, AT&T, and Claro. So we have been building in Brazil that pipeline about 20 towers a month for all investment-grade operators, economics that we think are really compelling, and we've been building them nationwide. And there's a mix of fantastic locations that you think are going to lease up really well, and there's a mix of Anatel-mandated locations that need to be built out that we understand that we have to take a little bit of the good with the bad in terms of the growth. But on balance, we think the demand is there. We think the economics are so strong when we actually build the site that you don't need a ton of lease up to make the model work, and especially when you compare it to other markets such as the U.S. and such as other markets in Central America, the entry multiples are so attractive that you're able to build the towers and bank on a little bit of lease up, and you get where you need to go. And we see that demand continuing. We see the needs. Again, Anatel has been driving a lot of this, and certainly the 4G consumption and 3G consumption across the nation has been driving this, are things that will keep that growth going for the coming years. And hearing my peers over here talk about Mexico, Brazil is an extremely complicated market as well. But you don't have this predominant carrier that's got 60% of the market share that kind of puts, obstacles in your path to growth. And in fact, because of the fact that they're all competing heavily against each other, it's a great market for tower companies. And certainly the macro trends notwithstanding, the tower market remains incredibly healthy. And that's why, as Shahram had said, there are still buyers, there's still financing available, although I will say it's extremely expensive financing, but it's out there, and there are still opportunities to grow. And when you take a long-term view of Brazil, I think it's a very fantastic market to be in and compelling market to be in, but you have to see the long view. And certainly it's the type of market where we see us growing a tower count from 700 towers by the end of this year to 1,500 towers in a year or 18 months from now. And there's not a lot of other markets that you could do that through BTS alone and some smaller M&A.
So some of the mature assets that you then bought as part of T4U, what sort of tenancy ratios would we be talking about?
We bought about 1.6 tenants per tower, which for Brazil is pretty mature. That's and again, one of the things that goes without saying is while there's 1.6 tenants per tower, because of the fact that these are in Sao Paulo and Rio and some of the more urban core locations on the coast of Brazil, there's substantial amendment traffic that these sites have seen as the carriers have added more throughput on the sites, and that's been a real source of lease up on the portfolio since we've closed on it, and something that we were banking on as well and did have as part of our business model when we closed.
So Torrecom, Northeast, National,
in our case, as you know, we started only in the northeast of Brazil, which is the most underdeveloped part of Brazil. Our initial business model was to build 100 towers. Today we have 700. So you can imagine that once we reached 200, 300 towers, there was no way for us to just be focused in one region. Although, in terms of operation and cost of operation, it's always more effective to focus in one region rather than just going nationwide. But because we have to produce more towers, we had to expand nationwide. So today we're building all over Brazil. But again, 50% of our production still remains in the northeast of Brazil. Just for the audience, in terms of the cellular market in Brazil, you have 5 national carriers. The 4 major ones, they have nearly equal market share. Nextel being the 5th one, which has less market share. So you don't have any monopoly that you have in Mexico. So I would say, it's a pretty healthy market. It reminds me of the U.S. market maybe like 8-10 years ago. So obviously you will see consolidation in the future coming years, but for now it's a very healthy market. In terms of ratio, our goal is if we can hit 1.5 ratio tenancy per tower, it's a good number. Knowing that our portfolio is mainly built, first it's a brand new portfolio. It's a brand new portfolio compared to the T4U portfolio. So all our towers are in locations where we have a rule where we do not build a tower that is within a radius of 10 kilometers of an existing tower in Brazil. So all our towers are at least 10 kilometers away from existing towers. So the 1.5, we're hoping to hit that within the next, or let's say the acquirer of our towers hopefully will hit that ratio with 1.5. I wanted to make to clarify a couple of points. First, in terms of financing, it is correct that the interest rate in Brazil are extremely high. They are around 16 to 18%, which I know in the US sounds crazy, but nothing is more expensive than equity. So having dealt with the private equity at the beginning of this venture, I can tell you that even at 30% interest rate, it's better to borrow money than dealing with private equity. So that's one. Second, why I always said we're in the business of exiting is because each time we sell a tower, with the money that we collect, I built 4 new towers. And BTC is a company that is owned by private citizens, one of them being here. We're not owned by any major fund. We're the 4th biggest tower company in Brazil. The 3 others are American Tower SPA and Torre Sur that is backed by Providence. You can imagine that it would have been impossible to hold on to equity if we had gone out and try to hold on to portfolios during several years. So being able to control a company for me is worth more than trying to be the king and say, I have 3,000 towers. I'd rather have 10 towers, own them, rather than having 10,000 towers and maybe own 0.001% of it. So,
I want to open it up for questions from the audience, and in the meantime, maybe just ask a couple more Brazil questions. First off, on network sharing, and to what degree is that reality, and what does it even mean? Is it glorified roaming, or is it actual sharing of active electronics? What are you seeing in the market? And as a tower operator, how do you confront it?
We see the carriers trying to negotiate the ability to RAN share into their master lease agreements. We don't really see it happening in practice. We see certainly on some of the Anatel mandated kind of more far-flung locations that they need coverage in Brazil. There certainly is conversation among some of the carriers about cooperating and sharing of equipment. Again, it's not something that has been very prevalent, but we do think as the tower model continues to evolve in Brazil and frankly across the world, because this is a buzzword in the United States as well, it's a buzzword in Colombia, it's a buzzword in certainly in Europe and in Australia and other markets, that they are sharing their signal. And so I do think that it is a threat to the tower model and something that all of the tower companies should be disciplined in trying to manage as best they can. However, again, as Shahram had noted, that the carriers are really competitive for market share in Brazil right now, so we don't see it predominantly across Brazil, or at least at Phoenix we have not seen it predominantly in Brazil today, but it's something that we certainly are always trying to guard against in our contracts with the carriers.
In the case of Brazil, we do not have any contract that allows RAN sharing, even though some of the carriers have tried. In the market itself, I have no knowledge of any carrier sharing RAN in Brazil. Recently, we started participating in an RFP with Telefónica in Guatemala, where they are asking for RAN sharing. Obviously, we're not going to enter a market, or we're not going to sign off on any contract that allows such sharing without any financial compensation for us. I mean, we're not in the business of just putting steel. We're in the business of making money. So I'm sorry to be blunt.
It's the truth.
So, you know, the subject, the topic is in the air, although I have not seen this happening. But knowing the cost of deployment, knowing the cost of technology, knowing the size of those countries, I mean, keep in mind that if you remove Alaska from the US, Brazil is bigger than the United States. So if all these carriers had to deploy their own networks, if they had to deploy 2G, 3G, 4G, and who knows what comes next, independently, it would be impossible for them to get the return of their investment. So the sharing of the equipment is something that will happen. I foresee that, you know, you will have third parties even owning network and renting capacity to the carriers. I have been approached by some of the carriers to not only install the tower, but also install the equipment for them and rent capacity to them. Obviously, you know, I have turned that down because there's no upside in that kind of business for now. But you know, the future, I think the future is the RAN sharing. We can resist maybe for a couple of years, but you know, it's impossible to stop progress.
Question.
Referencing the RAN sharing thing, won't you just have to change your pricing to pricing on bandwidth to make up for maybe space?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think there are ways to work with the carriers, and this is something that Phoenix is constantly doing. We want the carriers to achieve their goals. If the reality is that they're going to RAN share and it's going to be a condition, then the question is, how do you price it to our benefit? And how do we share in those sites that they are RAN sharing at? Certainly, the tower industry as a whole has been working with landlords for a number of years that have requested revenue share, and they've come to some accommodation that makes sense for all parties. And at Phoenix, we're constantly looking to work with our carriers to help them grow their networks. Not every country is the same. There's some competitive pressures they have in some markets that they don't have with others. And I think that's an example of something that we may look at and evaluate when we're working with some of the operator partners that we have across the region. But there has to be something in it for us. There has to be some economic benefit to us for it. And I think the carriers also understand that as well. And some of the carriers have proactively offered certain type of, call it sharing arrangements or rental increases or things of that nature to the extent they would RAN share. And we've been open-minded to having that discussion with certain carriers.
The key to that, though, is being able to have the initial contract drafted in such a way so that you're able to protect yourself in the long run.
Yep.
So you have to cover the entire contract word for word to make sure you're locked down. Once you're locked down and you can prevent them from doing things, to this day, still in the United States and certainly in the other countries, carriers are continually going on site under the theory of I have to go maintain, and my guys go out and follow them, and there's a batch of new panels. I mean, same thing here, it happens over there. So if the contractor is really clear to lock everything down, you can come to any business terms to make it right for the business and to help the carrier. But the key is in the contract.
That's right.
I mean, you know, I view that in a slightly differently than my colleagues. The big aggregators who are the potential buyers of those build-to-suit portfolios are allergic to the concept of run sharing, meaning that if you want to sell them a portfolio where there is a contract that even mention that concept, they would not even look at your portfolio. So because of that, I systematically refuse to even engage in that kind of conversation with the clients. Now, I have this luxury today because the demand is so great in Brazil, and the carriers, they have such a great need that the relationship is not an equal relationship, meaning that they have a need, we can help them with those needs. But as things move forward and as the number of towers increase in Brazil, obviously the relationship will change, and I'm sure the carrier will try to enforce or to force into the new contracts the run sharing concept. But for now, it's not even a subject of conversation, at least between Brazil Tower and our clients. And even if there is a contract for run sharing, I don't see how those carriers, they can even manage that today.
So real quick, in the minute and a half remaining, Charam, you just told us as of today you're in Colombia, and I'd like to ask other panelists, as you look throughout the region at attractive markets that you're not currently in that are worth considering, which markets come to mind, and if Cuba and Argentina are not on the list, when might they be on the list?
Well, I think the last place I will talk about the markets that we may enter would be on this panel. But we are looking at other markets, and certainly there are logical expansions given the base of countries that we're currently in. I think, again, unlike Sharam, we are a long-term player in the space. We are building a business that we think will last a number of years. We are not looking towards an exit. And to do that, you want to have conversations with the carriers about where they're going, where they're spending their capital, where we could be strategic partners to them. And you want to be flexible in that regard. And you want to be able to look at new opportunities, look at new markets, whether it's, frankly, in Latin America or other markets across the world. And having Blackstone behind us has made that possible. Having flexible capital behind us has been a huge advantage to this type of a business plan, because we don't have to go out and fundraise every time we see an interesting opportunity in a different market. And also building a business with strong personnel in each of the markets we're in, strong processes, a strong back office in Boca allows us to scale the business logically into new markets. In terms of Cuba and Argentina, I don't think you'll see us there anytime soon, but they are interesting markets for two very different reasons. I think in Cuba, to the extent that they did liberalize the spectrum and some of the major carriers came to Cuba, having a major foothold in the Dominican Republic makes that an interesting market for us. I don't think it's there today. And I think in Argentina, of course, you have the age-old question of how you take your money out and how you can repatriate funds out of the country. And to the extent we could somehow solve that, I think there's a phenomenal opportunity there. But it's the same problem that a lot of other tower companies have had, and it's the reason that you don't have a robust tower market, although you do have people that are looking at Argentina right now inquisitively, and I think it's an interesting market for sure if you could figure that out, and something that certainly we'll continue to evaluate.
Argentina is a very interesting market, and I'll tell you why. Just last year at this very conference, there are carriers that are begging for tower infrastructure providers to come into that market. It's a very exciting market, but the problem is still the same from a risk management and investment standpoint of view. What do you do there? Now, I will say that one of our peers has most recently done the first BTS in Argentina. I congratulate him. He's got a lot of courage, and that's what it was going to take to enter in the market, is somebody who is able to, stomach the risk issues that exist there, and we'll see what happens. Cuba, I'm very excited about. I think it's a marvelous opportunity. We have to shake out the world. The land ownership is a big issue in Cuba, which is a problem from our business perspective. The carriers are hunting, the U.S. carriers are hunting Cuba quite feverishly right now, starting originally with Sprint and T-Mobile because of their Florida markets, and that's since expanded to AT&T and Verizon. So the interest is clearly there to be a very competitive, robust place to be. But not unlike us, the carriers also have a concern about their asset and what's going to happen with the asset and what happened and the asset on the ground and everything else. So we still have a long way to go, but it's an interesting place.
I think that'll be the last word. We're 2 minutes into stoppage time, so I'd like to thank the panelists.